So that's the Israeli Prime Minister's view, which I know you're familiar with. I want to quote to you Secretary Antony Blinken's view. He has said that measures taken by the Israeli military to protect civilians have not been applied consistently and effectively. So I want to ask you, why, in your view, is the Biden administration, which of course you know has been quite supportive of Israel since the start of this war on October 7th, why is that view wrong?
Well, I can't speak for the administration, Jim, but I mean, my assessment, based on, to include being on the ground in Gaza with the IDF, but more importantly, it's the research, the decade of research into every urban-centric battle, where you're talking about battles against ISIS or World War II battles, is that the data supports my conclusion that Israel has done more, as in these, we call them civilian harm mitigation measures. Things like evacuating cities, daily pauses, not taking strikes, handing out their maps, using advanced technologies to track civilian population. All these measures that even the United States military did not use in its past operations, like the invasion of Iraq or invasion of Panama or other urban-centric warfare.
Okay, let's speak about the data for a moment, because I know you've analyzed the data closely. I want to quote from someone else who's analyzed the data, Wes Bryant, special operations with the Joint Terminal. He was a Joint Terminal Attack Controller during the U.S. War on Terror. He reviewed thousands of incident reports, tens of thousands of individual data points from several dozen credible organizations, as well as from the Israeli military, and he found, quote, a systematic disregard for fundamental principles of international law, including recurrent attacks launched despite foreseeably disproportionate harm to civilians. So I wonder what your reaction is to his assessment of the data and why you're confident that your analysis of the data supersedes his and others.
Sure. I mean, one of it starts with you comparing apples to oranges. So to compare Gaza or the operations against Hamas embedded in 400 miles of tunnels, so tunnels and bunkers, and to use whatever data point that they're comparing. One is, it sounds like a misunderstanding of what the law of war requires, especially a proportionality assessment. So what's the military advantage of a target, and what are the expected collateral damage and the feasible steps taken to prevent civilian casualties, like evacuating cities and prior notice to attack and intelligence. So I think that the difference is, one is an understanding of the law of war requirements to do proportionality assessments, and then the data which these people, not citing anybody, don't have access to. So what they do is infer, Jim. They do what's called a text-based.
John, in fairness, I'm quoting to you someone who is quite aware of the law of war. He worked in special operations for the U.S. military in the Joint Terminal Attack, as a Joint Terminal Attack Controller, making exactly those decisions. And he examined not the data about U.S. military interactions prior, but Israeli military activity in Gaza. So he's looking at the same data and coming to a different conclusion.
So as far as I know, Jim, that author has not visited Israel or Gaza and embedded with the IDF or the targeting cell. So he's making an analysis without the actual body of data that you would need, which would be the information that Israel had when they're doing their targeting, whether individual strikes or operations. So I'm saying the person you're quoting is making an inference based on the effects of operations, but not the data in which a law of war proportionality assessment would include, which is what intelligence did you have when you took those strikes, as in what was the target, what was the expected collateral damage, and what did you do to prevent it? So I'm saying you're quoting somebody who is making an inference without all of the information, which I found a lot of people do, or they do what's called lies, damn lies, and statistics, and take the effects of military operations and compare it to what they know, or a completely different context, like you're quoting his experiences in recent operations.
But what you're doing, John, is you're dismissing what is not an outlier position. As you know, General David Petraeus, who commanded U.S. forces in Iraq and Afghanistan, led the CIA, has criticized Israeli military operations. Peter Mansour, who wrote the book on the U.S. surge in Iraq, has criticized Israeli operations. So I should note that view of both the data and the conflict is not an outlier. Let me just for a moment, because for folks watching here,
well, let me respond
they
to
will
that,
often
Jim.
see images of particularly, let me just show you video of an incident that took place just in the last week since I've been in Gaza, since I've been in Israel. This took place earlier this month. It was an attack on a school in Gaza in which Gaza civilians, Palestinian civilians, were taking shelter. More than 90 people were killed, and this includes women and children. The IDF described this attack as precisely striking Hamas terrorists operating with the Hamas command and control center embedded in the building. Now, I know, as well as you, that Hamas often hides behind civilians, but CNN has confirmed the IDF used 3 GBU-39 250-pound bombs. How can that be described as a precise strike, given the number of civilian casualties?
One is because I don't believe that number of civilian casualties. We have a problem with determining what is the civilian casualty count in operations where the only spokesman for those numbers is local sources that are Hamas validated or Hamas sources themselves. So in that strike, which I think is a great example, in that context of a strike, you would have to know what was the enemy known target, number of targets, and then what was the known status, when did they take the strike, what did they do to prevent civilian casualties, and then what were the actual results. And this is where mass media, not saying you specifically, but keep parroting whatever number that comes out of Gaza within hours. And I've studied war for a long time. I've never seen anybody ever be able to get civilian casualty counts within hours like we seem to be able to do repeatedly over and
John,
over.
but you're dismissing the entire. You can take issue with the health ministry of Gaza's specific numbers, but as you know, the Biden administration, the Pentagon, has said that civilian death tolls in Gaza of many thousands, including many thousands of women and children, they found credible as well. So you can't dismiss the civilian casualties as entirely incredible. And I should note that CNN has fixers on the ground there that witnesses the results of these strikes and sees the bodies of women and children and the elderly. So you can't dismiss all the civilian casualties. So my question is,
No, I'm not dismissing
what gives
that
you
there are
confidence?
civilian deaths in Gaza. That's a fact, and this is war. But the question is Israel doing everything feasible? That's the law of war requirements. Feasible to prevent civilian harm, and there is no data that you're presenting that says they're not. Have there been civilians, to include women and children, that have died in Gaza? Absolutely. Is it 40,000? Absolutely not. Who is the cause of that civilian death? I think that the international fingers should be pointing at Hamas, who doesn't sometimes embed, it uses human shields and human sacrifice as its strategy. So again, I think we're coming at it from different angles. When you can have your own opinions, you can't have your own facts.
Understood, but I'm quoting people who have facts. But before we go, and by the way, I've interviewed Hamas officials myself and challenged them on that very issue of hiding behind civilian casualties. But this gets to a larger issue, and you've written recently yourself, and I'm quoting you here, it is now Israel's responsibility to create the conditions that would allow new leadership in Gaza to survive. The role of Israeli forces should not amount to a constant presence in Gaza. In other words, looking forward to the next step here. And with the question, for all this destruction, I want to put up a picture that we have here of what parts of Gaza have been leveled by Israeli military activity here. For that level of physical destruction and the level of civilian casualties, Hamas remains in Gaza, and their leader is still alive. These are before and after pictures. Has that civilian toll been worth not accomplishing, at least at this point, what was Israel's stated goal going into this war, which was to destroy Hamas? Hamas is not destroyed.
Well, Jim, I'd ask you to read the rest of the article you're quoting, which is that Israel is winning, that there are few Hamas leaders left, and that they're a fraction of what they are, where you have Yahya Sinwar wanting to add his survival onto the hostage negotiation deal. I'd ask you to read the rest of the article or read the recent multiple general officers that went into Gaza as part of a military commission and conclude, like me, that Israel is following the law of war, is destroying Hamas, and is doing everything physically possible while Hamas is doing everything that they can to get civilians killed. Israel is doing everything to prevent it. And I disagree strongly. That's why I wrote the article that Israel has not been successful. While you want to use the numbers of at what cost, and this is where it really comes into, is the war just and is it being executed justly? And I don't think your sources or experts or data says differently.
Yeah. Well, the fact is there are quite public comments from quite reputable, experienced generals, General Petraeus among them, but not confined to him, that have criticized the progress of the war. John Spencer, I did read your piece. I appreciate the conversation. Let's look for another opportunity to explore the same.
Thanks, Jim.